Hello once again, this is Hibernate and this is our fourth tutorial and if possible the last tutorial demonstrating how to create, update, delete and retrieve data from the database using Hibernate. In the last tutorials we have seen how to configure Hibernate to be able to work with Hibernate, how to run how to create DAO classes. These DAO classes and they are these classes which contain the methods for updating, deleting, retrieving data and other things that we want. And now here it is the final part where we'll be using this graphical user interface to give commands to the project to do whatever we want. So the logic of this is that we will of course be entering data using these input fields. Then when we click on the save button, we should have data saved in the database using methods from this .dao class and using also Hibernate sessions to save the data. So what we need now is to add codes to these three, mainly these three yeah, what we need is these three methods: the save, update and delete. We need to add data on these buttons, and as you have already seen and as you have also been familiar or became familiar with this update and delete and save, the first thing we need to do is to first of all retrieve data. We take the data from the input fields. The steps are: you take the data, you put it in a variable, and this variable will hold in a in some time before we put in the database. The data will be stored in these variables. So for example, the type of food that we want to enter will be stored in this variable from this type combo box, and this is how it is the code from retrieving data from a combo box is written. If you want to use a text field, this is the way data is retrieved from the text field, and then this is how to retrieve data from a J calendar. So the next steps will be to take the data that we have stored in these variables: type, name, quality, and then we add this data in our object. And we also know that these objects are the ones which are mapped to the database. So using this DAO class, stock DAO class, we're going to use the save method to map this object to the database. So by only saying like save, by telling the session to save, it is going to take data from this object and save it in the database automatically. So well, we are lucky that actually there's nothing you're going to change or do on this project because everything is almost similar with what you used to do with GDBC. To be able to save data, you take data from the fields, you send data into the model class or the object, then you tell DAO or the controller class to save data. And you also know that to save data, we have a method called save, and this method is the one we have called here. And what this method will do is will tell the session to save data that you have stored in this model class or this object, and this object is mapped in the database using the entity and ID annotations. So this is what it takes to be able to save data in the database. Then the next question will be, how do we do it then when we want to update data? In GDBC, steps for updating data were a little bit confusing and a little bit more complicated. But the happy thing here in Hibernate is the method or the code for updating data is the simplest possible. All you need to do is to select everything from here, and you're going to look for where we have the code for updating data, or you can come here on update, say right click, event, action, action performed, and then we paste the data here to the database, or I mean to this specified field. But then luckily, because these fields here are almost similar to what we have here, so I think we don't even need to change anything. The reason why here it is written update stock, it is because we have created a method in JDBC. We had a method called update. This method, what it did, it is the one which updated data, and that method is written here. You can see it. This is a method we have created aside to update data for us, but because you are no longer in JDBC and we not need to create connections, create prepare statement and sessions, we'll delete it. And since life have become easy for us, all we need to do is to simply call the stock DAO class and tell that class to update data. So what we say is, excuse me, we'll write stock DAO, stock, we give it a name, object name, new, stock DAO, and then we tell the stock DAO to update data for us in the database. This is all. And the same is what you're going to do when you want to delete data from the database. So I select what I have here in the update. Then I'm going to put that in the space where I'll be updating data. I mean deleting data. This is where there is code for the delete button. Delete button action performed. So what I need to change here is simply delete. So by summarizing what you have been doing here, you can see that everything is the same. To save data, it's the same. All we need to do is to specify whether from the stock DAO class we want to save, if you want to update, and if you want to delete. And from the stock DAO, we know that here to save, it's the same. All we need to say is we tell the session to save, we tell the session to update, and we tell the session to delete. Nothing else, nothing difficult here. So the next thing is, what if we want to retrieve data from the database? So what we do is we create a method that will be retrieving data for us from the database. So first of all, let me also remove this data from this display table method. This is the method that will be displaying table for us, retrieving table from the database for us. So there are two different ways that we can do it here to be able to retrieve data from the database and display it in the table. First, we can do it in two ways. The first one is to create a method that will be accepting data that we have from the database, that we have brought from the database. And that method, what that method will be doing is creating a list of data from data that we have stored in this stock data list. Here, we have created a list after retrieving data from the database. So the next thing we need is to take this list and be able to use that list to display data that we have retrieved from the database. So what we're going to do is create a list. So I'm going to use examples that I've been doing the last time. So the first thing you need to do is pretty much create a list, private. Okay, I'm going to call private void get list of stock, and that method is going to create a list, which will be using the stock object, and the list will call it stock lst, and then we'll say we will first of all call the stock DAO and give it a name and say that so now what we need to do is tell the stock DAO that we need a list of food or a list of the we can use this stock list and you remember that we have two different uh, types of methods for retrieving data from the database. You can either choose to use this one or use this one. So in my case, to make my life easier, I'm going to use this stock list here. So this is the one I'm going to call. And here we're done. So the next thing is import Java utilist. So now that we have the stock list, so the next thing we need to do is to first here I will have to make this method public so that I could be able to get or access to data from this method. If it is private, from this display that in JTable method, I could not be able to get these lists. So the next thing is I'm going to display data in the table. So you know that we first of all have to also have a copy of this method here. The method name we have to put it in the non-parameterized constructor so that whenever we run this project, we're also going to retrieve data from the database and display that data in the table. So what we're going to do is here is first of all we create a default table model as usual. These steps here are not special for JDBC. These steps here I'm writing, they are common steps to be able to display something in the table. Don't remember the name of my table, so I do right click to change variable name. So the table is called data table, so it's the one I'm going to write here, dot get, and then I say models that set row count to 0. So to save data, it will start from 0 by counting, and then the next thing is I'm going to enter data in the database. So what I need is a list of data, somewhere I can read data and then display that data into the table. So I'm going to use this method called get list of stock. This method has a list of data, so I'm going to use this method and then save that data. So to be able to use this stock list, I need to make it like a public variable, so that I could be able to access that data from anywhere. So what will happen is I no longer need to declare the the stock list from here because it's already declared here. So the reason why I did this, it is because I want this stock list variable here to be accessed by any method which needs the list of data from the database. So if, for example, I want to um, get a list of, for example, stock name, like I mean names of the items in the database, I will not need to create another method for retrieving data from the database. I'll be simply using this get list of stock method. And this get list of stock method, it has a list inside it. And this list is the one we're going to be using whenever we need the list of data from the database. So I had to create a list which is a global variable. Making a variable a global variable, you simply need to put it outside a method. So when it is outside a method, you are free to use it whenever and wherever you want. So I also have to remove this database connector class, I guess, because you no longer need to connect to the database. And then another thing here is, now that we have this list of data, what we need to do is say for stock, and this is another way of using for loop for stock. So this way of looping says for every time we have values from this stock object, then we're going to be displaying a list. So then the next thing is we say model.insert row and then model.get row count. Then we create the objects, new object, and then here we go. Then we say stock dot get name. So here we start with the name, I guess, comma stock dot get quantity. Well, here I should start with stock dot get type. Then after getting the quantity, we have stock dot get price, I guess. Let me make sure I'm right. We first type name, quantity, quality, price, and entry date. So quantity, then stock dot get quality, then the price, then stock dot get entry date. So this is it. This is the way we actually display data from the database using JDBC. So again, here you see that the steps for doing that are even more simpler and shorter than the ones we used to do when we are using JDBC. So uh, as a conclusion, you see, Hibernate is much more interactive, easier to understand, easier to use, and most of the things are like similar compared to GDBC, where you had to, yeah, like use many steps to do something. So the most important key you should note here is that you simply need to have a list. Here in Hibernate, there is a very frequent use of lists, especially when we are selecting data from the database. We use lists, so I recommend everyone to try to learn and understand how collections. If I'm talking about collections, I mean array lists and other kind of collections work, so that they'll be able to use them easily in Hibernate. So this is it. I'm gonna make sure if there is nothing left untouched, and if there is nothing left, then the last thing will be running the project, and then we see if everything is as expected to be. So there are all the buttons we need. We have a method to display data in the table. Yeah, we have a method that, okay, something else that we need to do is to add this get list stock method to the to the stock to the stock manager non-parameterized constructor. So you should note that the following constructor, this constructor called public stock manager, actually runs the methods which are set to run whenever the project is run. If we run this project, this constructor will run the init component method. This init component method contains all the components that we see in this graphical user interface. And then we want, after running that and displaying those components from the graphical user interface, we want it to get the list of stock. So it will go and fetch from the database. It will bring us a list of stock data. And after doing that, we are going to display that data in the table. So this is it. Let me run and see what we'll get. So I guess there are some errors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to first remove these errors. If there is somewhere there are complications, this database connector class, which is still there, and we no longer need to use database connectors. So I guess there is no more error. The project is safe. Now let me run again and see. And here, when you run a Hibernate project, by using the other configuration we have precised in the Hibernate configuration file, we have said that we want that whenever Hibernate runs, we're going to see what it is doing. So it's better, it's like very important to configure the Hibernate configuration file properly. And for those who don't remember the Hibernate configuration file, it is this one here. This Hibernate configuration files. There is a configuration that we said show SQL, and we said yes. This means that it will going to create tables and tell us whatever it is doing. And here, because we say that whenever we run the project, we want to select data from the database and put it in this list. This is why you see here it has already run the select query from the database. So we didn't write this query actually. So it did it for us. So the next thing is we're going to insert data and see if that data is going to be really saved in the database and then later retrieved to be displayed in this table. angle 1, 2, 3, 5. Very good. Price, let me say 400. And date, let me put the date of today. Save and see. So the data was inserted in the database, and then we remain with one problem: data was not displayed in the table. So we need to find out why it was not saved in the database. We need to see if we still have these displayed in the table method. Well, you know what, as I have said, to be able to display data, we first have to retrieve data and put it in a list, then we display the data. So whenever I have this method displaying the table, I should also be having this get list of stock method before it. So you remember that we said whenever we save, we also want to display data, but we also first have to retrieve the data. So these two methods should go hand in hand. We get the data and then we display the data. The same thing here on the update button action performed. We need to specify that we first need to get the list of data, then we display that data in the table. The same thing here. So let us run and see if the change will be like beneficial. So you see here that now as we run the project, what we have saved in the database is now displayed in the table. This is giving us a good sign that the project is working properly. Then let us add some other data, like say pizza. Then we choose 3. Good. Price we say like 1000. Then we choose a date 6. Then we save. As we save, automatically data is retrieved from the database. So if you want to see how it was done, we selected data from the database the first time when we ran the project, and then as we saved, the data was inserted in the database, and then to be able to be displayed in the table, we also run the select query. And note that Hibernate does all this for us. We do not need to meet some database queries to select, insert data, or precise what we want to select. So if we click on everything, it's functional. If you want to update, we simply need to change whatever we want to change, and then let me say like 900, and then if you click update, the data will be updated and changes will be also changed here in the table. So this is it for the project from this last tutorial about how to do the CRUD in Hibernate. So I'll say like what you need to pay attention to be able to properly and well do the Hibernate project. The first thing before I could go deeper into the last explanation is that you need to kind of get familiar with Hibernate, understand its logic, and you need to not get worried about those red notices here. You should know that when you run a Hibernate project, it shows you what it is doing. So you need to get familiar to reading those things here and know when there is an error and learn to debug those errors by reading what it is written here. So coming back to the codes here, we have created the following files. The first file we've created, of course, we started by creating a database. And after creating a database, we also added Hibernate library. After adding the Hibernate library, we added the Hibernate utility class. This Hibernate utility class, we did not use it. It is there to create sessions for us, and it is used when it is needed in the DAO class by calling it to create sessions. So we closed it and we didn't use it in our own practical coding. We were calling it like virtually, but we didn't meet it. And after creating the Hibernate utility class, we used this Hibernate configuration file to give it details about what we wanted to use and to do with our Hibernate. So it contains details about the dialect, the driver, the URL we are using, the password, the username, and the mapped class that we want to map to the database, and the other configurations. And this class was also done after we had saved it. It was done. And then we came to here to creating an object or a podule. What we did with this podule is that we gave it like I'll say we gave it annotations so that it can be recognized as a database entity. After doing that, we created methods which were responsible for doing the activities you want. And you see, these methods are like similar, most of them. Those which do the saving, updating, and deleting activities are pretty the same. What you need to do is do some practice and understand how this was done. And like if better, you could even memorize it. And then here we also have some other strange methods which are responsible for retrieving data from the database. And we have seen that these methods simply have something added in it, and that is those two lines, the line for uh, the line for retrieving data from the database using a short query and then putting that data into a list, and then the last one, then another version of the method which retrieves data from the database is this one, which uses what we call criterias. So from this DAO class, what we did is we used an already created GFrame form, which also had some other functionalities already inbuilt. So all you need to do is to know that what changed here is like actually these methods didn't change, because all we need to do is get data from the input fields, put the data into the object, and then tell the DAO class to update, save, or delete the data. Another thing that we have done is on these methods which are responsible for retrieving data from the database and displaying the data in the table. All we did is we used the stock DAO class, which already has a method which contains a list of the data from the database. We simply called it and we created a new list that we'll be using in this project in this form. So that list, we made it a global variable so that it can be accessed by any method which wants to use the list of data from the database. Then what we did is also use that list here to put data in the table. So what we also have noted is whenever we want to display data in the database, we need to first retrieve the data and then display the data. If you want to display table in the table, I mean data in the table, I'm sorry. So these methods have been going hand in hand. Whenever we wanted to display it after saving, you see here I've written that data twice. I mean these methods were following each other, and whenever we wanted to also update, those methods were there, and delete, that's the same. So the remaining well, like the obvious things that we need to do, like the methods that allowed us to click on the table and then by clicking on the table, the data is put back in the input fields. This is it, and this, I guess, it's all about how to use graphical user interfaces. So I think this is the end of this tutorial about how to create a Hibernate project using Java. So I guess this is uh, it, and I thank you all for, like, yeah, taking your time. Thank you.